The public and the private lives of Britain's royal family have captivated the world for generations. Last month, 90-year-old Queen Elizabeth II made history as the longest-serving British monarch with a 65-year reign. Her son, Prince Charles, now holds the record as the longest-waiting heir to the British throne. Prince Charles, The Passions and Paradoxes of an Improbable Life, what a title, is the first major biography of Charles in more than 20 years. It sheds new light on the defining moments that shaped the future king. Author Sally Bedell Smith joins us at the table to discuss. Welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful
Sally
to be
Bedell
here
Smith.
to see you all.
Have you?
Yeah. I was struck by the phrase in your book that you used a lot. Poor Charles is what a lot of people used to say to him as he was growing up in his teenage years, and now that he's sitting waiting to be queen. What do you mean,
Waiting
poor
to be
Charles?
king.
Waiting to be king.
Did I say?
Well,
Thank you. I mean king. How do I get that wrong? King. Sorry.
He was just an incredibly sensitive child,
Yes.
and he is somebody who's really caught between two worlds. He was brought up in this incredibly traditional environment. He went out outside the palace for school for the first time, but everything was set up for him. And so he's caught between the very traditional upbringing of his mother, who is so popular, and then he's got the more modern children, William and Harry. So he's kind of the man in the middle. And he's always been kind of overshadowed by both. And when I started working on this book 5 years ago, he seemed to be this kind of blurry figure in the background, and he seemed ready to be looked at with a magnifying glass to really see what makes him tick.
Yeah.
Did he cooperate?
He did. They gave me a lot of cooperation. It's not an official biography, but that's fine because I like to be independent. But I was able to travel to Sri Lanka and to Malta to see him at work, to visit all of the places he's most proud of. He's built a model town in Dorset that is fascinating because there are poor people and rich people living side by side. It's got a very advanced fuel plant that uses plant waste to produce renewable energy. So that's part of the dichotomy. I mean, he is somebody who is like Lord Grantham in Downton Abbey. He's still dressed by a valet every day, but he was one of the pioneers of green energy. So I found him. There you get the paradoxes. And he's also just, he's a real Renaissance man. I was, having written about the Queen, having written about his first wife, Diana, I was astonished at the range of his interests and also accomplishments. I mean, who knew he's rebuilt an old quarter of Kabul, Afghanistan, with 65 buildings rehabilitated and an institute of traditional art.
But still, people always want to know, Sally, about him and Princess Diana.
Yes.
Because it seems so troubled, as you write, from the very start. It was a troubled relationship, and certainly even on their wedding day, there were chinks in the armor before they tied the knot.
Even before they, the 6 months before they actually walked down the aisle. I mean, the astonishing thing that I found out was that they'd only been together for 12 times before he proposed to her.
Yeah.
He made a promise that he was going to be married by the age of 30. Obviously, his role was to produce the next heir. That was important. The press was on his back. His parents were on it. He felt terrible pressure. So he met somebody who looked on paper, she was from a very aristocratic family, but he didn't know that she had a very sort of troubled emotional history from the time she was really 6 years old, and her parents had a really ugly divorce. And so they didn't have the time to get to know each other, to develop a mature relationship, say the way Kate and William did. They were able to live together for 8 years before they got married. He scarcely knew Diana. There was a 12-year age gap. They had very little, if anything, in common. And
he was in love with Camilla.
And he was in love with Camilla, and that's a whole backstory of this book. I mean, Camilla, his more than 40-year love for Camilla is kind of at the heart of the book. He fell madly in love with her in 1972. And then he went off to the Navy expecting her to wait for him, but she was not appropriate because she'd had a lot of romances. And one...
What's the euphemism for romance, Sally?
She was well navigated, let's say. That was the traditional part. He was expected to marry a virginal girl, and Diana, a sweet charactered girl who he could put on a pedestal. And that's what Diana was. And even though he was in love with Camilla, and as you said, on the eve of their wedding, Diana was so tied up in knots. She was violently ill, staying with her sister, and he was looking out the windows of Buckingham Palace, and his valet walked up to him and said, "Sir, why are you crying?" And he said, can you be in love with two women at the same time? So he was sort of tormented about it from the beginning.
Yeah, somebody. So what about her, though? I mean, you wrote a book about Diana.
Yes.
I mean, she was madly in love with him, or?
She was. She really sort of went after him. I mean, she had a kind of idealized vision of what it would be like to be a princess. Her step-grandmother was Barbara Cartland, who wrote all these, these fantastical novels. But she was crazy about him, and to be, there was nobody's fault. They were thrown together. They were a mismatch, and it was just troubled.
He's ready to be king.
Yes.
I believe he is.
Mom,
I believe
now.
he is ready to be king. I mean, one of the fascinating things I found out is that since 2008, he has been under a very close tutorial by the Queen's senior private secretary, sort of getting him through this transition. For his whole life, he's been able to do what he wanted to do, basically, to be a charitable entrepreneur, to start all these things.
And he's a great father.
He's a great father. That was one of the real things that I've discovered in this book.
The longest heir in waiting.
Longest heir in waiting. But you know what? He will not have a long reign, but he will be remembered for a lot of good accomplishments while he was Prince of Wales.
How old is he now?
He's 68.
Yeah.
Well, I got a new phrase today, you guys. Well navigated. Don't want to be that. Well navigated girl. Okay.
Okay. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I know.
That's from my podcast. That's from my podcast that I'm going to start.
Well navigated and navigate well.
Yes. Got it.
That's right. Know how to drive that train, baby.
Got it.